on behalf of the Ancient Studies on Consciousness. Swami Sarvapriyananda, Minister in Charge and Spiritual Leader of the Vedanta Society of New York, USA. Swamiji served as an Acharya of the Monastic Probationers Training Center at Belurumat. He has served the Ramakrishna Mutt and Mission in various capacities. He was the first registrar of the Vivekananda University at Belurumat. Swamiji is going to speak on consciousness studies in ancient India, Mandukya Upanishad perspective. Maharaj.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, very well. Yes, Maharaj. We can.
All right. Om asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityurma amritam gamaya. Om shanti shanti shanti. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real, lead us from darkness unto light, lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. Thank you for having me in this August gathering. I offer my pranams to revered Swami Atmapriyanandaji, my greetings to other revered monks, brahmacharis, the distinguished scholars on this panel, and greetings to all the other members of the audience, I think, who have gathered from all around the world. And it's also being live streamed, so many people are watching on YouTube. At least I know some people are staying awake late in the night here in the East Coast of the United States, and they are watching this. There has been a recent burst of interest in consciousness studies. Okay, before I go into that, let me just say how I'm going to proceed. So I'll speak for about 30 minutes so we can have more time for interaction and question answers. So keep your questions in mind and you can put them on the chat or ask afterwards. So as I was saying, there's been a recent burst of interest in consciousness studies in the last 20, 25 years. It's so interesting how that which is so close to us, our own consciousness, has become the focus of scientific investigation, serious scientific investigation, only at the very end, after investigating the skies above and the oceans and the earth, our own bodies. Finally, we come to something which is the closest to us. But it has happened in the past too. Swami Vivekananda says in ancient India, the rishis first actually turned their attention outwards, and then finding no satisfactory explanation to the mystery of life and the universe, they turned their attention inwards to the self and to consciousness. Consciousness studies is not a new phenomenon. It's actually a very ancient enterprise. It started with the Upanishads 5,000 years ago or even earlier. One of the recent books I came across, Waking, Dreaming, Being by Evan Thompson. He's a professor of philosophy at the University of British Columbia in Canada. He holds that the Upanishads are so important in human history that we should date our history with, instead of AD and BC, we should date our history with before Upanishad and after Upanishad, because they have given us such a quantum jump in the understanding of the mystery of what we are, that the Upanishads are absolutely central. What is it that the Upanishads say about consciousness? So that's what I'm going to talk about for almost all of my talk, and I'll end with some concluding remarks about what's going on now in the field of consciousness studies and what Advaita Vedanta can contribute. Among the Upanishads, the shortest and one of the most celebrated Upanishads is the Mandukya Upanishad. This Mandukya Upanishad is found in the Atharva Veda, and the text itself is very short, only 12 mantras. But it is usually studied with the Karikas of Gaudapada. Gaudapada was Adi Shankaracharya's teacher's teacher. So the Karikas of Gaudapada and which are in 4 chapters. So the Upanishad is embedded in the first chapter of Gaudapada's Karikas. And on the whole thing, the Upanishads and the Karikas of Gaudapada, we have the commentary of Adi Shankaracharya. So nowadays, usually when you study the Mandukya Upanishad, you study the Upanishad itself, the Karikas, along with the commentary of Shankaracharya. So it's a kind of a 3-layered text. The Upanishad is interesting for many reasons. For example, you find the Mahavakya, the profound sentence, Ayam Atma Brahma, this very self is the absolute reality. It's known for its very short size, of course, very brief dimension. Also, there's a very interesting story. Hanuman is supposed to have asked Ramchandra, how can a person who wants liberation, moksha, so what should we do? And Ramchandra replied, for those who want moksha, the Mandukya Upanishad is itself sufficient. Mandukyam ekamevalam, mumukshunam vimuktaye. For those who want liberation, the Mandukya Upanishad is enough. And suppose you don't get liberation by studying the Mandukya Upanishad, then Ramachandra goes on to give a list of 108 Upanishads. So it's better to get liberation by studying the Mandukya Upanishad. Otherwise, the course expands dramatically. So what does the Mandukya Upanishad do? It starts off by an investigation into the self. It says that if we know ourselves, we know the secret of the entire universe. By knowing the self, you know Brahman, the absolute reality, which is the reality of the entire universe. How do we know the self? Now, this teaching is common to all the Upanishads. One caveat is I'm speaking entirely from the Advaita Vedanta perspective, and there are other perspectives in Vedanta, of course. All the Upanishads, they have the same message, but each Upanishad has its unique way of approaching it. In the Mandukya Upanishad, the unique way is, it says that the self has 4 aspects. 3 of them are very well known. And using these 3, the 4th one is what the Mandukya Upanishad wants to teach us. So the first 3, which is the waking and the dreaming and the deep sleep, will be investigated to discover the 4th aspect, which we do not know. The Mandukya wants to teach us that. So, often when I talk about the Mandukya Upanishad, it's very natural to make a mistake. People think that, the Upanishad is about waking, dreaming, deep sleep. It's not about waking, dreaming, deep sleep. It's in fact about what we discover when we investigate waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. So it's, for example, we talk about the dream state, and people often have this question about the contents of their dreams. I dreamt this. What does it mean? So the reply is the Mandukya is not interested in what we dreamt. Mandukya is interested in the dreamer, not the contents of your dream. So the contents of your dream are probably of interest to your therapist, but not to the Mandukya. So the self has 4 aspects. There is the waking, there is the dream, there is the deep sleep, and the 4th, which Gaudapada later on, he calls it the Turiya. Turiya literally means the 4th. The waking is defined as consciousness, being aware of the external world through sense organs. It's a practical sort of working definition. And then we fall asleep and then we dream, and the dream is defined as experiences entirely within the mind. So we do not contact external objects through the senses, though it looks very much like we are awake when we experience dreams. And deep sleep is where we are not aware of external objects, and we are not aware of dreams, imaginations within the mind, projections within the mind. So this, I'm sort of giving a very rough and ready translation of the Upanishad itself, the Upanishadic definitions of Jagrat and Swapna and Sushupti. Deep sleep is interesting. In deep sleep, we are aware of neither the external world, nor of dreams, nor indeed of ourselves, that we are in deep sleep. We are not aware of that. If we think that you're in deep sleep, then you're not in deep sleep. I remember in one of the series of seminars on consciousness we had at the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture in Gold Park about a decade ago. during which I, for the first time, met Dr. Ravindra, actually, there at the Institute of Culture in Gold Park. There was an interesting exchange between a neuroscientist and a philosopher. The philosopher was Dr. Larson, and I don't remember the name of the neuroscientist who was visiting from England. So the exchange was very interesting. Dr. Larson asked the neuroscientist, he said, Doctor, tell me, according to the neuroscience, the brain science view of deep sleep, is there consciousness in deep sleep? And the neuroscientist said, no, we don't think that there is consciousness in deep sleep. And Professor Larson, who is a Sankhya philosopher, who in fact passed away last year here in the United States, Professor Larson gave a very nice reply. So in neuroscience, so according to modern science, neuroscience, brain science, there is no consciousness in deep sleep. And he says, according to Indian philosophy, Sankhya or Vedanta, there is only consciousness in deep sleep. Consciousness does not have an object. So that's the gulf that separates us, the point of view. Deep sleep is an interesting subject because for Advaita Vedanta, because we can all understand that there is some kind of consciousness when we are awake. Obviously, we are conscious right now. Dreams also, we have some kind of consciousness because we have conscious experiences within our own mind. Deep sleep would normally look like no consciousness. But deep sleep, according to Advaita Vedanta, is not an absence of experience. Rather, it's an experience of absence. So we generally have experiences when consciousness is lighting up objects. So we are aware of certain things we see and hear and smell and taste and touch and think and remember, desire and hate. So these are all consciousness lighting up different objects of consciousness. But suppose the objects of consciousness are removed, then what would it be like? It would be like deep sleep. One very good example is the space between the sun and the earth. It looks dark, it looks black, but it's actually full of light streaming from the sun to the earth. So for example, when a comet passes through that light, you see the tail of the comet light up with a gorgeous display. It's not that the comet has its own light, it's sunlight. But when the comet passes through it, now it is reflected. It reflects the sunlight. And then we have this beautiful display of the comet. So consciousness is like that. Without an object, it is very difficult to appreciate that there is consciousness. When there's an object, consciousness does two things. One is most obvious, it reveals the object to us. And that's what happens in the waking and in the dream. In deep sleep, what happens is, okay, so two things. One is it reveals, it illuminates. So we have knowledge of objects, both in waking and in dream. But the second thing which consciousness does, I'm saying within quotes, because it doesn't do anything, it's just there, it just shines. So the second thing, what happens is, consciousness itself is revealed in the experiencing of objects. So it's something like this. When I see a pen, first is, of course, I'm seeing a pen. The pen, I know the pen, I can see the pen. But it's also revealing to me that I have eyes, because that's how I'm able to see it. Though I'm not seeing my eyes, I'm seeing the pen. The very fact of seeing the pen reveals to me that I have eyes. Similarly, the very fact of experiencing not only reveals the objects of experience, whether external or internal, but also reveals consciousness to itself. Now, the seventh mantra of the Upanishad, Mandukya Upanishad, is the most important one. There, he finally gets to what the Upanishad gets to what it wants to say. Having talked about the waker and the waker's experience of the waking world, the dreamer and the dreamer's experience of the dream world, and the deep sleepers, sort of non-experiencing experience of the blankness of deep sleep, where there is no world, there is no personality, or there is no body. Remember, it's a good time to make this point. The entire approach of the Upanishad is what today would be called phenomenological, tracking our internal experience, conscious experience. It's not an external study. In science, it's an external study. You make an object of study, so the body or the nervous system or the brain, and then you study it, or the behavior. But here, it's an internal study by looking at our own first-person experience. the difference is very clear. I remember a humorous incident. Perhaps Swami Sarvapriyananda might remember it also. He was explaining this very point in Calcutta University more than 15 years ago, I think. And I had accompanied him for that particular talk. And he was saying in the deep sleep state, there is no world, there is no body. Professor, I think he was a professor of physiology there in the audience, could not take it anymore. He stood up and he said, "What do you mean there is no body? We see that fellow, he's snoring and sleeping." So you see, here's the problem. You are thinking about it externally, that here is a subject who is in deep sleep. But the Upanishad is not talking like that. The Upanishad is saying, how do you experience waking? How do you experience dream? And how do you experience deep sleep? Now, none of these are what the Upanishad really wants to tell us. The Upanishad wants to tell us that by study, by a contemplation, an investigation into waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, we come to a stunning discovery, which is the fourth. That is the subject of the seventh mantra. The seventh mantra is very profound, very powerful, one of the most inspiring passages in all of Upanishadic literature. It certainly is my favorite. So I'd like to, with your permission, I'd like to chant it, and then we will go into it. It goes like this. Nanta pragyam na bahish pragyam na ubhayata pragyam na pragyana ghanam na pragyam na pragyam adrishtam abhyavaharyam akrahyam alakshanam achintyam abhyapadeshyam ekatma pratyasaram prapanchopashamam shantam shivam advaitam chaturtham manyante sa atma savigneyaha. Very beautiful passage. What does it mean? It starts with a string of interesting negations. It says, the real nature of the self, and thereby the real nature of consciousness. You see, here consciousness and self are identified. By investigating the nature of self, do you see what the Upanishad is doing? When talking about the nature of the self, is talking about what we consider to be conscious experience, waking, dreaming, seeing, hearing, tasting, remembering, all of that. So the real nature of consciousness is not the dreamer, nanta pragyam. It's not the externalized awareness, that is bahish pragyam. It's not the waker, not what we think ourselves to be right now. You see, our common sense idea, and also the scientific idea about self and consciousness is, right now, here I am in this body, experiencing a world, and I'm aware of myself, the world, and also internal states. This is consciousness. This is the waker experiencing the waker's world. And the Upanishad at the very beginning says that this is not the reality. In fact, the whole project of Advaita Vedanta, the whole project of Mandukya Upanishad and Advaita Vedanta is to shift the reference of the I, what I am, to shift the reference from the body-mind of the waker's experience, to that fourth, which Mandukya is going to talk about. So it's not the dreamer, not the waker having this experience. The Upanishad is not talking about the deep sleeper either. Na pragyana ghanam. In between, something in between. People sometimes ask, especially here in America, they say, "What about when people are high? We are on marijuana or weed or something like that, or somebody is in a coma or some kind of in between state." Now, any kind of in-between state, that also is dismissed. Not even that. So are we talking about pragyam? Shankaracharya helps us here. What it means is seeing or knowing everything at once. That is omniscience. Let's say the mind of God. Is it that? Are you talking about God? No, not even that. Are you talking about no consciousness? Apragyam, like a stone or a rock or something? Not even that. Then it goes on to deny the objects of consciousness. So it's not something that you see, adrishtam. By saying adrishtam, it also denies the objects of all the other senses, not something that you hear or smell or taste or touch. Then it's not an object of the organs of action, the motor organs, agrahyam. So this is obvious. Consciousness is obviously not something that you can grasp or you can walk to, or extending this, it cannot be something that you engage in with instruments, for example. So it's not an object for organs of action. Avyavaharyam. I'm just changing the order of the words a little bit here and there for convenience. Avyavaharyam means beyond transaction, beyond empirical usage. So you cannot engage with consciousness as an object. Consciousness is that which engages with everything, but you cannot put a cart before the horse. You cannot make consciousness an object and engage with it. Avyavaharyam. Literally, it means useless. So I joke sometimes that according to Advaita Vedanta, Brahman, the ultimate reality, is perfectly useless. I'm joking because all usage is based on consciousness. Without consciousness, no use, no utility is possible. Avyavaharyam. Then it is alakshanam, it cannot be inferred. I mean, each of these words, we can go very deep into it. Inferential knowledge is basically all of science. All of science is inference based on data. It cannot be inferred, it says, and there are reasons why. It cannot be talked about. Abhyapadeshyam. Abhyapadeshyam cannot be talked about. The entire philosophy of language comes into play here. What can language do and what it cannot do? And Shankaracharya gives 5 ways in which language functions, and he shows why none of them apply to consciousness. So you cannot talk meaningfully about consciousness, but in the sense of consciousness, what the Upanishad is talking about. Then achintyam, since you cannot use words, you cannot even think about it. Whatever you conceive of is not consciousness. In fact, if you say, I have understood it, if you have understood it, then it's not consciousness. You have understood something else. Now it seems hopeless. So if you negate everything, waker, dreamer, deep sleep, and all of that, seems hopeless. It's also interesting. Shankaracharya raises the question at this point. Why is it that the Upanishad starts with negation? How beautifully the Upanishad defined waking, consciousness through sense organs, experiences an external world, that's waking. Or experiences things in the mind, that's dreaming. So you could have just as well said, what is this fourth? Talk about pure consciousness or consciousness itself. Give a positive definition. Why start with, it is not this, it is not that? Why do you do that? And then Shankaracharya says, it is only by negating the appearance that the reality can be arrived at. If the rope is appearing as a snake, you have to deny the snake to arrive at the rope because the rope is right there. Also, Shankaracharya gives a very beautiful indication, insight. Na anya dwaram asti. There is no other door. Very interesting. The only way to get enlightenment, only way to realize who we truly are, this whole project of the Upanishads, is by investigating the conscious experience which is available. What is commonly available to all of us? Waking, dreaming, deep sleep. And the grand conclusion or the claim of the Upanishad is, by a simple inquiry into our waking experience, dream experience, and deep sleep experience, the real nature of consciousness will be revealed to you. So these are denied to uncover or to discover what lies underneath. Remember, when it is said that it is not the waking experience, not the dream experience, not the deep sleep experience, consciousness is something apart from them, it's also equally meant it is that which flows in and through all these experiences. It is that which makes these experiences possible, but it is not limited to just being the waker or the dreamer or the deep sleeper. Then is there any positive way of talking about consciousness? Here comes ekatma pratyasaram. This whole sense of I, that I exist. If you investigate this leads straight to the heart of the matter. In fact, the whole of Ramana Maharshi's Who Am I, the teaching of Who Am I, is right here. Ekatma pratyasaram. Then a string of very extraordinary terms Shankaracharya, the Upanishad uses. Prapanchopashamam. Beautiful word. It means the cessation of the universe. It means I call it the silence of the universe. So by this very word, it is the Upanishad expresses the grand Advaitic doctrine, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. So Brahman is the reality, and what we take as the real world is an appearance of that reality. That's what is meant by Prapanchopashamam. And Gaudapada dedicates an entire chapter. In fact, the second chapter of the Gaudapada Karika Vaitatya Prakaranam, is dedicated to explaining this one word. Why is the world that we experience, why is it called false? There is a word which is popular in New York. It's a Jewish word, chutzpah, which means the temerity, the gall of, how dare they say this? You see, look at the boldness of the Upanishad. Normally, the proof of experience is, a proof of the existence of something is that we experience it. Why do you think that this pen is there in my hand? You say, Swami, I see it in your hands. I see it. It's an object of my vision. Therefore, it is real. Upanishad says just the opposite. Because you see something, because it's an object of consciousness, it can't be real. And Shankaracharya goes on to use this to develop his entire theory of superimposition, Adhyasa, in his classic Adhyasa Bhashya. So the object which is there in consciousness cannot be a distinct reality. It must be a superimposition on consciousness, and therefore false. Prapanchopashamam. Gaudapada will have a lot of fun with this in the second chapter. Then it says Shantam. It is the cessation of, because the world is not real, it's an appearance. So all trouble. Note that all trouble is in the waking. All trouble is in the dream. You may have nightmares. In deep sleep, there's no trouble apparently, but the seed of the bija, Gaudapada will say, the seed of all trouble is there, because you wake up from the deep sleep and you come back to the troublesome world. But here, the fourth is Shantam, is peaceful, beyond all trouble. And then Shivam, auspicious. It is, you can translate, you can take it as fulfillment, bliss. Shantam, Shivam, Advaitam, non-dual. A very profound statement again. Consciousness is non-dual means ultimately Advaita Vedanta holds that there is no second thing apart from consciousness. The fourth, the real consciousness, apart from consciousness, there is no second thing, which means all that we experience now in consciousness is in some deep, profound sense, nothing other than consciousness. Whatever we experience in the dream, in the waking world, in the dream world, and the blankness of deep sleep, all of that is not a second reality apart from consciousness. Gaudapada spends a full chapter, the third chapter, Advaita Prakaranam, dealing with this one word, Advaitam. And then Gaudapada says, it is said to be the fourth. Said to be, by whom? By fools. Here, the Upanishad is pulled a fast one on us. It is not really the fourth. See, how can it be? There'll be no second to it. There's a consciousness only. There's no second reality. In what sense can it be the fourth? So that means the first three, waker and the waker's world, dreamer and the dreamer's world, and the deep sleeper and the potential world in the deep sleep. All of it is not 1, 2, 3, but they are all appearances of the one. Much as if you make ornaments out of gold, a bracelet, a necklace, a ring, and then you take gold into account. From the perspective of gold, the ornaments are not a second reality because they are all gold. So they are all appearances of one underlying substance. In the same way, this pure consciousness is that. So what? Sa Atma. That's you. That's your real nature, not the waker which you think yourself to be right now. And so what do we do? Savigya. It has to be realized. So the whole process of how do we make it a living reality for us. Okay. I've finished my main presentation. I don't know how I'm doing for time. I'll just make a few quick remarks about the present day context and stop and take questions. Here, New York, we have a very interesting man, David Chalmers. He's one of the leading philosophers in the world today. He's the head of the New York University Mind Brain Consciousness Unit. And we have had nice interactions. He doesn't know my name. He knows me as the guy in orange. So, no, but we correspond sometimes. He has coined the term the hard problem of consciousness. So what has happened right now in the philosophy of consciousness is that this whole attempt to reduce consciousness to brain states. David Chalmers says it can't be done. You cannot explain consciousness through just neuroscience. You must take first-person experience into account. How does tiny bits of electrical activity in the neurons, in the brain, produce this vivid first-person experience we are having right now? How is it possible? So that's what he calls the hard problem of consciousness. What is the easy problem? With all respect to all the neuroscientists present here, he explains, he says, I don't mean easy in the sense of it's very easy, it's very difficult, no doubt, but easy in the sense that these are all what neuroscientists are working on in consciousness studies. They are problems of what he calls finding the correlates, neural correlates of consciousness. So various kinds of conscious experiences in waking, maybe dreaming, maybe even deep sleep, and what's happening corresponding to that in the brain. So with sophisticated new imaging techniques, which our scientists know far better than any of us, it's now possible to track this. In fact, Evan Thompson, his book is right here. He talks about
I think because of the network problem, we are not able to connect with. So we'll wait for him for a while.
So I had an amusing thought, perhaps the Swami has gone to Turiya state of Samadhi.
So what do we do, Maharaj?
We'll wait for it. Okay. So in the meantime, people can cook up some questions.
There is one question from the YouTube, Satyajit Mahanti. So he's raising the question, the difference between alertness and consciousness.
Difference between
Just we read out then
alertness and consciousness. Satyajit Mahanti.
Satyajit Mahanti.
It's a good
Same
time to
answer question he asked earlier.
yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, Maharaj, we can.
So Sarvapriyananda,
Yes.
we lost you temporarily. We thought that
Yes.
we had gone with Turiya state.
Our Sushupti state, actually, it's 1:40 a.m. here. So I just was talking about this book, Waking, Dreaming, and Being. Evan Thompson talks about Francisco Varela, who was talking about something called neurophenomenology. So the one possibility of consciousness studies, where the ancient traditions can interact with modern neuroscience, is that you can have trained meditators who can accurately describe their internal states, so phenomenologically describe it, and you can have neuroscientists or cognitive scientists working with them, so you can carefully map those states. So that's one area which this book has been pushing. Of course, this is something that the Dalai Lama has encouraged. Some of the lamas have volunteered for this kind of work. Yeah, so David Chalmers and the hard problem of consciousness is a big issue where I think Advaita Vedanta can contribute a lot. I just make a couple of remarks and stop here. You will be very happy to know that David Chalmers himself organized a colloquium on Advaita Vedanta and the hard problem of consciousness here in New York University. And some of the top philosophers of mind in the Western world were present. Professor Miri Al-Bahari from Australia. So she presented the Advaita Vedanta perspective. So that's one point. And yeah, that's about it. I think I will take questions now. Thank you so much for this patient hearing. I'm sorry for that interruption. My internet's been spotty this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you for such a deep and comprehensive discussion on the subject of consciousness as found in Mandukya Upanishad, and how elegantly you claim that consciousness is an ancient pursuit. And you have also elaborated on the aspect of consciousness studies being subjective and private. That is, we have a direct access to our experiences, which is a first-person knowledge. You also mentioned that how in the Upanishad, it is claimed that to arrive at the reality, one should inquire what is available to a person, that is his waking dream and deep sleep state. Such wonderfully and elegantly you have made your presentation. Now we would have questions for Swami Sarvapriyananda ji. We have a question from a YouTuber, Satyajit Mahanti, and his question is, what is the difference between alertness and consciousness? What is the difference between alertness and consciousness?
Yes. So we are forced to use these terms, awareness, alertness, consciousness, because there is no clear or direct term in English which can refer to the Turiya or to pure consciousness. Let me answer the question first, and I'll make one more remark. The answer you can find in, for example, in Dridrisha Viveka. You see, the question, what the questioner wants to know is, when I wake up in the morning, I feel sleepy. Then I'd have a cup of coffee, I feel more consciousness. And then late in the night, I feel sleepy again. So don't I feel more conscious, less conscious, depending on the time of the day or tiredness and all? So alertness, that increases and decreases. So according to Advaita Vedanta, or even Sankhya, this alertness is a function of the mind. So this brings us to an important distinction. Advaita Vedanta, in common with just about every other system of Indian philosophy, except the Charvaka maybe, Advaita Vedanta makes a clear distinction between mind and consciousness. Mind and consciousness are not the same. On what basis do you make this distinction? A very elegant basis. I'll share this with you. Whatever is an object of experience is not consciousness. So consciousness can be negatively defined as anidam chaitanyam, not this consciousness. Now, can you describe a pen as an object? Very clearly. Can you describe your body as an object? Very clearly. Can you describe your mind as an object? Yes, thoughts, feelings, emotions, happy, sad, understand, don't understand, remember, forget. All of these are objects. You are aware of it internally. In that case, according to Advaita Vedanta, they are not consciousness. They are also objects of consciousness. And consciousness is that which illumines or presents these objects. Now, in the modern study of consciousness, in consciousness studies here, in the philosophy of mind, this distinction is not at all clear. It's something that's very clear in Indian philosophy. It's not at all clear to scholars here in the West. So when we talk about consciousness here, I see them all the time making this mistake. It's clearly a mistake. That leads to, I saw many confusions in the philosophy of mind, at least, can be clarified if we could arrive at a definition of consciousness and a distinction between consciousness and mind. If this is not done, what happens is you sort of tie yourself into knots. And so this question, attention. Now the answer can be given very clearly from an Advaitic perspective or Sankhyan perspective. Attention is a property of the mind. So the mind is alert, and that also has a lot of connection with the body. So you take a cup of coffee, put caffeine into your system, and the system is stimulated. The mind also feels alert, and it reflects consciousness better, and therefore it seems to be more conscious, within quotes. According to Advaita Vedanta, in the perspective of Turiya, there is no such thing as more conscious or less conscious. Consciousness is one and unchanging. It's the reflecting medium, the channelizing medium, the mind, which gives us this effect of being more alert, less alert, understand, not understand, remember, unable to remember. All are functions of the mind. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj. We have more questions. I'll just read out. Yes, this is a question from Indu Ramachandani. In the quest of realizing one's conscious reality, how does one continue to function in the karma bhumi simultaneously? Should I repeat the question once more?
No, the straight answer is very well. When one hears all this, one may think that one will be paralyzed in day-to-day life. How can you lead a normal life if you are thinking in this way, that the world is an appearance and it's false? Not at all. When you have questions like this, doubts like this, just look at actual practitioners. So those who you regard as saints or enlightened people, so they actually function better in life than we do. They are happier, they are more serene, they are calm under stress, they are full of joy, they uplift the rest of us. So they function supernormal, better than just about everyone. They have tremendous amount of resilience, positivity. So this kind of thinking, this kind of, once one internalizes it, actually is of extraordinary help in living our life. Yeah.
Thank you, Bharat. We have a question from Varun Vigmal. Recently, there is a revival of a trend in philosophy of mind about panpsychism, which is non-dualistic, in which mind or consciousness is embedded in matter, or matter entails consciousness. Now, the question is, how compatible is this approach of contemporary philosophy of mind in comparison to phenomenology with Advaita Vedanta or Upanishads?
Very good question. I think it's a good question because I think I know the answer. That's why I'm calling it a very good question. But yes, David Chalmers here is responsible almost single-handedly for reviving. Panpsychism is an old idea, but for reviving and popularizing it now. So his solution to the hard problem of consciousness, David Chalmers' solution to the hard problem of consciousness is what he calls panpsychism. That if you cannot explain consciousness in a fundamental way through brain states, then you have to maybe accept that consciousness is a fundamental reality of the universe. So just like space, time, matter, energy, the fundamental forces of nature, similarly, can we say that consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe, present everywhere, manifest in living beings like us, in those who have highly organized nervous systems and brains? So this is called panpsychism. And this really, really annoys a lot of people. I have been in discussions where a philosopher at the city college here, Massimo. So I asked him, what do you think of David Chalmers' panpsychism as a solution to the hard problem? And he said, oh, Chalmers, he comes up with one answer, with one theory, each worse than the earlier one. So, yes, most scientists are furious with this. They will not, but they have no answer. How does the activity of the brain produce consciousness? Not only is there no answer, there is no good candidate for an answer also. I wish we had time, we could have gone into this, but look at all the candidates which are being proposed as an explanation for consciousness. You'll see there are numerous books and articles. Every other day, somebody sends me an article from some journal. Consciousness explained. Swami, read this. You just read one or two sentences. Keep in mind, anything that is an object is not consciousness. So the candidates are this kind of neuronal activity, or consciousness is because of some kind of explanation from quantum mechanics, or from integrated information theory, this the latest one, Tonini's thing. Advaita Vedanta will ask one question. Is it an object to consciousness? Is it something that you are aware of? The answer is obviously yes. It might be a very nice theory. It is not an explanation of consciousness. Now, panpsychism. Is it compatible? No. But I am saying panpsychism is a hopeful sign because for the first time, somebody, I had a conversation with Deepak Chopra once, and he said that, Swami, look, these people are taking our theories and they're not giving credit to us, and they're parading it as their discovery. And I said, it's actually a good thing. If philosophers and scientists here in the West, they take up theories like panpsychism, and they say we have nothing to do with Eastern philosophy or with Advaita or Buddhism, that's good. Because if they said that we are Advaitins, people would dismiss them. Oh, they follow some kind of Eastern philosophy, that's why they're saying it. But if they say, I'm coming at it from hardcore consciousness studies, from Western philosophy of mind, and I say consciousness must be a fundamental reality of the universe. Chalmers is very humorous. He's Australian, very humorous. In an interview, he says that that if you spend a long time thinking about the hard problem of consciousness, either you become a panpsychist or you go into administration. You become an administrator, he says. One of the two options are there only. So is it compatible with Upanishadic phenomenology? No, there are very big differences. It is closer to Sankhya. What David Chalmers is saying, he wouldn't know this, but 5,000 or more years ago, Kapila, who Vivekananda calls the first philosopher, gave exactly this, almost the same kind of theory. There are two ultimate realities in the universe. Consciousness is one reality, Purushas, and the other one is Prakriti, material reality, and they interact. More or less, that's what David Chalmers is trying to propose. Advaita goes further. Is there another question? Can you hear me? Hello?
Hello, we can hear you, Maharaj.
Yes. Was the next question?
Next question is from Sriraj Roy. How do we measure progress in our experiential understanding of consciousness, current stage to next stage?
I'm not sure if I understand the question, but if you're talking about Advaitic realization, then the spiritual path is steep and there are stages, but Advaita, the Mandukya Upanishad itself does not speak about stages. It says that by an inquiry into our present experience, waking, dreaming, deep sleep, all of us have it. One must get that intuitive flash, which in Vedanta later called the Brahmakara Vritti. You suddenly get the flash that, yes, I am this background awareness in which appears this waking, dreaming, deep sleep, these phenomenological experiences. See, stages, it's like saying, you're sitting right there. I see Rajiv Maharaj sitting there, right? So, yes. Now, suppose I were to ask Rajiv Maharaj, who's sitting right there, what are the stages of going to Belurumat? He will immediately explain that I have to leave this room and walk down, then take the right, and then go into the gate. If there's no lockdown, they will allow me in, so on and so forth. Those are the stages of going to Belurumat. Now, if I ask Rajiv Maharaj, what are the stages of sitting right there? What do you have to do one after another to sit right there where you are sitting? Nothing. Nothing. At the most, if you are under the delusion that you are not sitting in the university, the delusion will have to be corrected. Error will have to be corrected. But there are no stages of doing it. It's just a question of realizing that I am there. I am it. Yeah.
Okay. Maharaj, there is one question from this Advaita Dravid, a very, very out of the box question. What is the scope as a career in the field of consciousness?
I think it's good now. You can see all the, you can see Dr. Ravindra and Dr. Bindu Kuti and so many others. Dr. Datta is there. So if you want to pick up a career in consciousness studies, I think it's looking better and better. It's one of the hot spots, like the sunrise industry. So it's like a sort of sunrise sector of academic studies. You might have heard of Christoph Koch. He's the chief scientist of the Paul Allen Brain Institute here. So I went to a debate between him and David Chalmers right here in Brooklyn. So he was saying that when he started his career in consciousness studies, all his colleagues told him that this is career suicide. The most worthless area. You never take up this study because it's going to destroy your career. And he did not listen to any one of them. And now you see it's a booming field. I don't know where it will lead, but definitely this is one of the fields. And neuroscience, artificial intelligence. I have had scientists from Watson, Watson lab of IBM, where they're developing artificial intelligence. They are coming and asking, what is the Advaita Vedanta idea about consciousness? Can you have reflected consciousness in a mechanical matrix? If you have a sophisticated enough artificial brain, so can you have reflected consciousness there? Create a jiva, as it were. So there is endless scope now. I think this is really wonderful. It's intellectually challenging, but also it can be very good as a career. I think so. The scholars can tell you better.
Thank you, Maharaj. Maharaj, this is the last question that we are going to address now. And rest of the questions we will send you through email, and then you can answer them and we can forward them to the questioners, the people who had asked those questions. So the last question is from Ms. Geeta Kasal. And the question is, does meditation affect consciousness?
You can answer this based on what I have said about the Mandukya Upanishad. Straight answer, no. It might be a surprising answer, no. Now, Dr. Ravindra knows what I'm talking about. Otherwise, he would be annoyed at this kind of an answer. The meditation, it affects the mind. So here, see, again, a distinction between mind and consciousness has to be made. Meditation affects the mind. Meditation is like polishing the mirror. You want to see the reflection of your face in the mirror, you need to polish the mirror so that you can get a clear reflection of your face. Now, the mind is affected by the practice of meditation, and the mind is deeply connected to the brain. That we know by our modern study of neuroscience. All the neuroscientists will tell you that. And you know, Advaita, Vedanta, Sankhya, other Indian philosophies of mind would have no, or philosophies of consciousness would have no objection to this. If you say mind is connected with the brain, Sukshma Sharira and Sthula Sharira, they have deep intertwined and interconnectivity. That is understood. Notice one thing. A hard reductionist, materialist reductionist would claim that mind is material because it's a product of the brain. And you would think that a spiritualist like an Advaitin or a Sankhyan would object to this. Not at all. If whatever you are aware of is an object, then the mind is also something that you are aware of. Consciousness is aware of it. So the mind is also an object. According to Advaita Vedanta or Sankhya, mind is jada. Mind is insentient. It appears to be sentient because of the presence of consciousness. See, again, this huge difference between the Western approach, where it's mind and matter fight, starting from Descartes nearly 400 years ago. In Advaita Vedanta or in Indian philosophy, it's not a question of mind and matter. It's more a question of consciousness and its objects. So mind is definitely on the side of the objects. It's definitely on the side of the body and the brain. So if you say mind is deeply connected to the brain, and the practice of meditation affects the mind, affects the brain too. What affects the body and the brain will affect the mind also. You just have to take a cup of coffee to test it for yourself. Yes. So what does meditation have an effect? Meditation is supposed to affect the mind, not consciousness. It's like in Advaitic terms, you can say, so by meditating, will Brahman or Atma or the Turiya be affected? Not at all. But the mind, the mirror is polished, and we are enabled to recognize ourselves as that Turiya.